Hey folks, B59 here. Welcome back to our Piasa Transport playthrough of Transport Fever 2. And we're here at the docks in Baton Rouge Halt. And we see that Eliza Vital and Samuel Clemens have just left the boat after having come down from Vicksburg. And we'll go ahead and get started. And what they're here for are different purposes. Of course, Mr. Clemens is here to visit some friends, but Eliza is here to continue her review of the operations of Piasa Transport, in particular, the operations tied to Baton Rouge. This is a little bit smaller line or operations line than what we've seen with some of the other places that we visited, but this is his remit, and so this is what Eliza's going to take a look at today. And so here we see Baton Rouge, and basically the operations that we're going to cover today are limited to Baton Rouge and Shreveport. And then some of the lines that connect out of Baton Rouge to different areas we'll be taking a look at. But none of this down in New Orleans, which is deserving of its own ops review. And so Eliza will take a look at that in the future. And at that point, she will have completed her ops review of the Mississippi River. So what do we see here in Baton Rouge? Well, the first thing that Eliza is going to take a look at is just the public transport. And so what she'll do first is take a peek at the city information. And she sees there that Piasa Transport is providing transport to 1,887 destinations, which is a lot of destinations. And that is giving a 70% boost to the population. 70 residents altogether. It started with a target population of 100, and it now has growth of 200%, which adds another 191 residents in potential. So, you know, it now has 306 residents. What she also sees looking here is that we're only getting at Baton Rouge about half of the bricks and the bread that it needs to fully supply the city. So she realizes that's going to be part of what she's looking at here as well. So the first thing she'd really like to do is when she looks in here at the destinations and she looks at Baton Rouge itself, she sees that only 6% of the Baton Rouge traffic is being driven by the public transport system. And it's not too surprising, because when she takes a look at the system, she sees that there's really only one line, and it runs from the ferry up to these two locations and then back down again. And while they have some pretty broad reach, they don't cover the areas over here, and they don't cover all of the outlying areas, and I think, and she thinks that this is going to make a difference, because if you'll notice here, and she does, there's a tram that runs between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, and so if she can increase the use of public transport around Baton Rouge, she thinks that that's going to help drive not just our river transport system, but also the tram system, because when New Orleans citizens come up to Baton Rouge to work or to shop, when they get here, they're very limited on places that they can easily get to by public transport. So they're more likely to come by private transport. So her finding then is that Baton Rouge has inadequate public transport. And she's going to recommend to the branch manager here that the intercity bus system be created to help drive growth in Baton Rouge. She also is wants to take a closer look at the deliveries, because she saw that only half of the brick and half of the bread were being supplied. Over here is the brick drop-off line. And so what she'll first check is just what is our coverage like for bricks. And it looks like coverage is pretty good, but not complete. And this might be a little bit tricky. She's not sure she's going to be able to get complete with one drop-off, because there is a place down here that's not getting it, and there are some places up here. And it's unlikely that one drop-off is going to cover both of those. Although, is it possible? Is that possible? Does that cover down at the other end as well? Well, you know what? She's going to leave that to the branch manager to figure out, but she's going to note that that the brick drop-off needs replaced. She then takes a look at the food drop-off, and what she sees here is that here's the food drop-off line. And when she looks at coverage, she sees that she probably does have full coverage. Even though there are some places here that aren't covered by this drop off. What she finds is that there is coverage from this wharf, and so when food is dropped off here from the river boats, then it automatically gets supplied to the buildings that are down at this end of town. And in fact, that's probably going to simplify things for the brick drop off as well, because she really doesn't need to worry about adding a drop-off that will cover all of this area, because it's already getting covered by this harbor. Instead, she's just going to need one drop-off slightly moved to cover the places that are missing down here. So that looks pretty good. And there is no industry here in Baton Rouge that she needs to worry about. Although there's an oil well here, we're not using that to supply these refineries and chemical plants, because they're getting their fuel supplied from Shreveport and Oklahoma. And we kind of need them to continue to be supplied from there, because it enables us to be full going both ways. So she's not going to worry about these oil wells and this oil refinery in Baton Rouge. And so that pretty much covers the ground transport in Baton Rouge. So then she turns her attention to this Vicksburg, or rather the Baton Rouge. Let's see here. The Baton Rouge Shreveport, or rather it's the New Orleans Shreveport oil fuel tools line. And so this is the line that is taking fuel down from Shreveport, and then actually it takes it down to the New Orleans Industrial Wharf and drops it off. It's not taking fuel, it's taking refined oil down to the New Orleans Industrial Wharf, dropping it off, gets turned into fuel. The fuel gets loaded back onto the boats, comes up here to Baton Rouge, and we'll pick up tools to come back up here to Shreveport. And so what we're seeing today is that the we're not getting enough. We don't have enough boats on this line to basically pick up the fuel and the tools to go up to Shreveport. If we look at Shreveport itself, it also has an oil overload. So it also needs that line to have an increase in the number of boats so that it can deliver all of the fuel down here to New Orleans. So this oil refinery here in Shreveport has a consumers down here that can take close to 200, and we're only shipping half of what we need to from there. So the idea here then is really to make sure that we have enough capacity on this line to cover what Shreveport needs. And what Shreveport needs is a total of about 122 fuel, of which it's getting 80%, and about 98 tools, of which it's getting very little at the moment. And so it's getting, the boat down here is getting loaded up with fuel, but it's not getting loaded up with tools here. So there's probably a couple of things that could be done here. One is that we need to increase the capacity of this line by adding more boats. And then secondly, we may also want to think about only loading half full of fuel down here in New Orleans, so that there is plenty of room for the fuel coming back up to, or for the tools coming back up to Shreveport. So I think if we do those two things, or Eliza thinks, then we're going to be okay. Now, when she takes a look at Shreveport, she notices that there is another oil well here that is not being supplied into this oil refinery. And she considers whether or not it makes sense to go ahead and do that. And perhaps it would. But the thing is, today, this 400 fuel that's coming out of this oil well is getting converted into 200 refined oil. And that is pretty close to the capacity that Shreveport needs for refined fuel and tools. So if we get this line up to somewhere a little above 200, then that's going to fit nicely with the output of this oil refinery. So while we could add another line here to bring this other line of oil in, it's probably not really necessary because we would be out of balance then with our river transport line. So she's going to say that for now, that's not something that's required. We're just going to leave it as is, but we are going to fix the New Orleans Shreveport line by adding boats and maybe reconfiguring the pickups in New Orleans. So that looks pretty straightforward. The other thing that she wants to take a look at, she saw a lot of people sitting here at the passenger harbor in Baton Rouge, and she sees that this big harbor is overloaded, but a lot of that is being driven by this Shreveport Baton Rouge line. It has 206 people waiting to go to Shreveport. The line has only one boat and can only carry 63. So what she's going to recommend here is that more boats be added to this passenger ferry line so that we kind of free up space on this dock for the other boats, and we also continue to drive more passenger traffic between Baton Rouge and Shreveport. And she sees a similar thing here, although this is a small dock and probably doesn't need to be enlarged. It has 83 people plus waiting to go down to Shreveport. So if we can increase the number of boats on this line, and I think she thinks it'll probably require 2 boats, then it's going to open up this dock and open up the other dock and drive more traffic and overall be a good thing. And along those same lines, when she takes a look here at Shreveport, she sees that again, that it's a pretty limited bus system. There are two bus lines, a clockwise and a counterclockwise line, and they seem to be operating pretty well. But the city has grown now, and what she thinks is that what we probably want to do is make this line bigger. And so that's what she's going to recommend to the branch manager, that he also build out the bus line in Shreveport. So it's a pretty limited set of findings today, but that covers what she needs to do here in her Baton Rouge Ops review. So we're going to rejoin Eliza and Samuel Clemens as they get back on the boat and head down to New Orleans. As we rejoin Eliza and Samuel on the riverboat heading down out of Baton Rouge, going first to Lake Charles and then on to New Orleans. Samuel Clemens shares with Eliza his observations of this journey. He says the approaches to New Orleans were familiar. General aspects were unchanged. When one goes flying through London along a railway propped in the air on tall arches, he may inspect miles of upper bedrooms through the open windows. But the lower half of the houses is under his level and out of sight. Similarly, in High River Stage in the New Orleans region, the water is up to the top of the enclosing levee rim. The flat country behind it lies low, representing the bottom of a dish. And as the boat swims along, high on the flood, one looks down upon the houses and into the upper windows. There is nothing but that frail breastwork of earth between the people and destruction. The old brick salt warehouses clustered at the upper end of the city looked as they had always looked. Warehouses which had had a kind of Aladdin's lamp experience. However, since I had seen them. For when the war broke out, the proprietor went to bed one night, leaving them packed with thousands of sacks of vulgar salt, worth a couple of dollars a sack, and got up in the morning and found his mountain of salt turned into a mountain of gold, so to speak. So suddenly, and to so dizzy a height, had the war news sent up the price of the article. The vast reach of plank wharves remained unchanged, and there were as many ships as ever, but the long array of steamboats had vanished. Not altogether, of course, but not much of it was left. The city itself had not changed, to the eye. It had greatly increased in spread and population, but the look of the town was not altered. The dust, waste paper littered, was still deep in the streets. The deep, trough-like gutters alongside the curbstones were still half full of reposeful water with a dusty surface. The sidewalks were still, in the sugar and bacon region, encumbered by casks and barrels and hogsheads. The great blocks of austerely plain commercial houses were as dusty looking as ever. And with that, we'll leave Eliza and Samuel today. Thank you for joining this episode of our Piasa Transport playthrough, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.